I am your host, Craig Pasta Jardula. This is Pasta to Go. And this is LOL, Left on Left criticism, where the laugh criticizes itself and does it with a laugh to keep itself from crying. That's why we do it. And it's a great segment. Listen, we just went over the what happened on January 6th. A lot of people feel it was a false flag. Jeremy explained to us what a false flag was. If you didn't hear it, go back, watch our last segment. He gives some great detail to what a false flag is and what an inside job is and the history we have in America of actually, performing of sorts, because that's what this is. It's an act, these false flags, to get what we want. Not what we want, but what the deep state wants, what the intelligence community wants. And what do they want? Now we're going to talk about the why. But we're going to play a video first of Jesse Ventura talking on Piers Morgan that he thought what happened on 9/11 was possibly a false flag. And then we'll talk about what came out of 9/11, how the security state strengthened their powers, how the military-industrial complex got carte blanche to go into the Middle East because they were able to manufacture consent to the American people that the adversaries in the Middle East were terrorists and they hated Americans, and we needed to go in there and stop them. Because if we didn't stop them, what would they do next? They flew planes into a building. What could happen next? Listen to Jesse Ventura. Let's go full screen on this, talking to Piers Morgan about what he thinks about 9/11.
What would you have done on September the 12th, 2001? What would you have done if you'd been president?
What would I have done?
Yeah.
I would have done a legitimate investigation to find out what exactly happened on 9/11. How did they know who did this so quickly like they did Lee Harvey Oswald? How quick they knew Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy.
Because the people who did it were identified and we knew who they were.
Well, then why couldn't we have stopped them beforehand if they were identified and we knew who they were?
It was a failure of intelligence. Everyone's accepting.
No, it wasn't. We knew before with Condoleezza Rice's memo on August 6th when it stated right in the memo, bin Laden to steal planes and run them into buildings. And more stuff is coming out now also, how much the Bush administration ignored the intelligence. It was almost like they ignored it because they wanted it to happen.
Oh, come off it, Jesse.
No, not oh, come off it. Wait a minute. Every war fought starts with a false flag operation.
You can't, in all seriousness, sit there and try and make out anybody.
Okay, let me ask you this, Piers. Wait a minute. Let me ask you something. How much studying have you actually done of 9/11 other than what the government's told you and what mainstream media has told you? I've been studying it 4 years.
I was editor of a national newspaper.
I've talked to
people.
Wait a minute.
Depth every day for 5-6 months.
Really?
So I know a lot about it.
Well,
one thing I do know is,
let me ask you this then.
You cannot say that any member of the Bush administration knew it was going to happen or wanted it to happen. It's a ridiculous thing to say.
Ridiculous. Okay, let's talk about your BBC. I have a tape of a BBC reporter broadcasting directly back to England talking about a third building has collapsed. World Trade Center Building 7 talks for 7 minutes. All the while she's talking, World Trade Center Building 7 is still standing right behind her. It didn't fall for another half hour, yet they were doing a pre-broadcast back to England that, yes, it's true,
you need to
that this building fell and it hadn't fallen yet.
If you're trying to make out the British Broadcasting Company, one of the most respected news organizations in the world, was inventing huge buildings falling over, you need to have a break, Jesse. We'll come back after the break and we'll talk about Israel and Iran.
It reminds me of the whole Lee Harvey Oswald thing. Remember when they said that there was a paper in England that had that Lee Harvey Oswald had committed the murder of JFK before they had figured out and alerted the American people that Lee Harvey Oswald killed JFK?
Well, and they also had the wrong data on Oswald. They had it from an old intelligence file, and they had the wrong height about him and wrong information. So that adds the suspicion that he was pre-selected as a patsy.
Yeah. Well, here's my question to you, Mr. Kuzmarov, because you know so much about this stuff. I kind of often look at you as a historian. You do such great works. Maybe you're not, but I'd go to you for a lot of information of the past. What came out of 9/11, and which one do you think was the most, the worst piece of policy that actually, when I say worse for the safety of Americans and everything. What came out? What power did the state gain as a result from 9/11?
Well, yeah, I am a historian and I taught U.S. history for many years. So,
There
and
you go.
yeah, after 9/11, what the U.S. got was, well, we got the war on terror. That's the worst thing. I mean, that has killed millions of people. It destabilized large sections of the Middle East. It led to radicalization and growth of ISIS, just terrible destruction, and billions and trillions of dollars of our taxpayer dollars wasted and creating more terrorists and hatred against the United States. And that's money that could have been used to invest in our schools, invest in a good healthcare system, invest in our infrastructure, roads, the environment. And that's just a human tragedy. And then you have the U.S. Patriot Act, which eroded U.S. civil liberties and was really a betrayal of the United States Constitution and what the country stands for as we become more of a police state.
Yep. Absolutely. The Patriot Act, which was such an infringement on our civil liberties, right? The AUMF, people don't talk about the authorized use of military force, which only Barbara Lee voted against, even though she's okay with civilians getting killed in the Donbass nowadays because of Putin, right? But I mean, let's tip our hat off to her then because she was one of the only ones to do so. And the Middle East set on fire. Now, if you don't believe me that, the Middle East was set on fire as a result of 9/11, here's an old video from Wesley Clark reminding us, and, he had great insight too as well, reminding us what the military apparatus of the United States of the West was going to do after 9/11.
I went downstairs. I was leaving the Pentagon, and an officer from the Joint Staff called me into his office and said, I want you to know, he said, sir, we're going to attack Iraq. And I said, why? He said, we don't know. He said, I said, well, did they tie Saddam to 9/11? He said, no. And then we attacked Afghanistan. I was pretty happy about that. We should have. And then I came back to the Pentagon about 6 weeks later. I saw the same officer. I said, why haven't we attacked Iraq? We still going to attack Iraq? He said, oh, sir. He says, it's worse than that. He said, he pulled up a piece of paper off his desk. He said, I just got this memo from the Secretary of Defense's office. It says we're going to attack and destroy the governments in 7 countries in 5 years. We're going to start with Iraq, and then we're going to move to Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Iran. And this was just after the Shia uprising in March of 91, which we had provoked, and then we kept our troops on the sidelines and didn't intervene. And he said, but one thing we did learn, he said, we learned that we can use our military in the region, in the Middle East, and the Soviets won't stop us. He said, and we've got about 5 or 10 years to clean up those old Soviet client regimes, Syria, Iran, Iraq, before the next great superpower comes on to challenge us. They wanted us to destabilize the Middle East, turn it upside down, make it under our control. They could hardly wait to finish Iraq so they could move into Syria. It was like a laydown. Oh, our legions are going to go in there.
So, Jeremy, there you are. You have it right there. They set the Middle East on fire. You said the war on terror was probably one of the worst things to come out of the whole 9/11 situation. So there's a lot of motive, right, for the intelligence apparatus, the military-industrial complex, the CIA, all those other groups that we love, those 3-letter agencies, to have a false flag inside job when it came to 9/11. I think that's disputable. We can talk about it till the cows come home, but let's talk about what if we applied the same type of rationale or the same type of metrics to J-6? What did we, or I shouldn't say we, I keep saying we, what did the United States foreign policy apparatus, the intelligence communities, all those 3-letter agencies, what did they get out of January 6th?
Well, they've played up the threat now of domestic violence extremism, And there's evidence, we have FBI whistleblowers who've testified as to how the FBI had manipulated statistics and tried to manipulate public opinion about this. And that come very conveniently at a time. Well, as he was saying in that clip, we have a 5 or 10 year window. So the war on terror. Well, it's been 20 years now, and I think the public is tired of the war on terror. Certainly, and not seen it very positively. And they're also not really in fear anymore of Middle East terrorism. There have been very few, if any, terrorist attacked by Middle Easterners. So you need a new threat. And so what better threat than domestic violence extremism? And so that's why they would have manufactured this incident on January 6th and played up the threat from white supremacists and from the political right. And that's a strategy, it's a strategy of governance, because they don't want, people in the working class, middle class coming together and forming a social movement that will challenge the ruling oligarchy. They want to divide people.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they want more budget. Organizations like the FBI are all in on this because they
wait.
want
Let's stick with the first one. Let's stick with the first one real quick, Jeremy. I don't mean to cut you off because I know you can start rolling and you get on a roll, and I get it. But let's stick. So the first thing they received or they got from the January 6th situation was divisiveness. Being able to label our own citizens, they were able to label the intelligence community and the government as domestic terrorists, right? The ultimate form of divisiveness, right? Split the people so you can maintain all the control. Sin Tzu, right? I mean, it's the oldest trick in the book. That's the first thing they got it. What about number two, from a point of legislation? What legislation came out of January 6th?
Well, immediately there was a $2.1 billion bill to fund the Capitol Police and set up new regiments within that police and to really beef up the security around the Capitol. And that's a boondoggle for all the industry that are in the so-called military police industrial complex. $100 million more for Homeland Security in the 2022 budget. FBI got a $500 million budget increase, and then up to $1 billion increase by 2024. And the Department of Homeland Security got a huge budget increase for fighting domestic terrorism. And then that feeds all these industries that are involved, including in producing things like X-ray scanners and all kinds of electronic surveillance and policing technology. I mean, that's a huge business.
Yeah. So that's number two, legislation where they were able to get more money and funding to certain groups, the Capitol Police being one of them, all brand new toys, that sort of thing. So we have divisiveness and legislation. Okay, let's talk about the other part, contracts. Who made Scott? Who made money out of this, Jeremy? Who really stood to benefit from a situation on January 6th? Give us some names. Get a little juicy here, buddy.
Okay, well, I have not researched this exhaustively, so others can do more research and add. From the research I have done on this topic, I found that Benny Thompson was the chair of the House Homeland
J-6 committee. He was the chair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he, his biggest donor, he's a Democrat from the state of Mississippi. In the years 2023 and 24, according to OpenSecrets.com, OSI Systems Incorporated was his biggest donor, and they developed security systems including X-ray machines and metal detectors. And a subdivision of that corporation, Rapiscom System, has $1 million contracts with Homeland Security for all kinds of gadgets, things like X-ray machines. So these are big winners. They're getting these huge contracts from Homeland Security, whose budgets are being raised, and then they're donating to these politicians who are playing up the evil of the J-6 protesters or the perniciousness of the whole and violence of the whole thing to keep the public in fear.
Makes me think about Ukraine, right? So not only was it, everybody talks about Hunter Biden and Burisma, but what about Nancy Pelosi's son, Paul Pelosi? When the new government took over, he got a bunch of oil contracts. Adam Schiff had, I believe it was Igor Pasternak, one of the Ukrainian oligarchs who's now came into power, was able to throw some fundraisers for Adam Schiff over here, something like $1,500 a plate in Burbank. He got all the contracts for a lot of defense, weaponry over in Ukraine. So that, at the end of the day, you got to follow the money, right, Jeremy? But all right, so those are three things so far. We got divisiveness, we have legislation, we have funding, aka contracts. What's the big cherry on top? Who, what, and where? What's the big guy that really they wanted to go and snipe for this whole situation on January 6th?
Well, it's another way to, demonize Donald Trump, and it's part of a long campaign against Trump. And this falls, there's a similar campaign against Richard Nixon, and I think this is a blind spot for progressive and liberals because they hate Nixon, they hate Trump. They may have good reasons to hate both those political figures, but I mean, if they want to understand what's going on in American politics, they need to try and be honest and objective. And understanding that, there are elements who hated both Nixon and Trump for probably similar reasons. Nixon pushed for détente with Russia and China. Trump met with Vladimir Putin. He met with Kim Jong-un. I think there may be, people in the establishment who don't like his governing style. In the case of Trump, he says things that no American president has ever said. He said we were there in Syria to steal the oil. He said that, they was asked about Putin, is he a killer? He said, well, we have our killers here too. No American president has ever spoken that way, and kind of punctured some of the myths of American exceptionalism. So that's a reason they hate him. I mean, they may also hate him because they fear he's too right-wing, or his attitude toward immigrants gives a bad image for America.
Jeremy, let's be honest. The other lawmakers out there in Washington hates him because he gets in trouble for telling the truth, not for telling lies, and that's the not true. So listen, wrapping up.
Whatever the reason, there had been a campaign against him. Russiagate. There are these fraudulent impeachment hearings. There's this lawfare campaign. So J-6 is just another trick in the bag to try and discredit him. And they move with impeachment proceedings right after this. They're trying to exclude them from running again
in the ballot.
So they had to
that's why we did these segments today, because they tried to take them off the ballot in Colorado, Illinois, Hawaii, Maine. It was ridiculous. But let's wrap this up because we got to stay within the time frames. And the first one we went over, but a lot of good information. But so we're asking the question, why? Why would the intelligence apparatus, the military-industrial complex, the globalists, the people running this place over here, why would they want to have a false flag operation on January 6th? And Jeremy has explained to us 4 different reasons. Number 1, divisiveness, to split the people, keep them fighting with each other. Number 2, legislation that was enacted to get people a lot of money. And also when you follow that money, number 3, contracts, funding. People like Benny Thompson, we have to look into it, but I'm sure there's many other people who stand to gain. But more than the cherry on top was they wanted to demonize Donald Trump. So they have every reason in the world to pull off a false flag operation. But all you have to do is kind of put the pieces together, Jeremy, everything we talked about. And the biggest one is the fact that a bunch of Second Amendment gun nuts forgot to bring their guns when they're going to overturn the government. I mean, that's the biggest head scratcher out there. And I was there myself. And I can tell you the majority of the people that were there were peaceful, loving people that just wanted some transparency and an honest, fair election system. January 6th was a stop the steal rally. That's all it was. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. And all these J-6 prisoners that have been there locked up without any due process, it's a shame. Jeremy, give us your closing thoughts on this topic over here.
Well, in a show critiquing the left, and the left traditionally valued civil liberties, and cares about other humans, and we don't want to see people who have a legal right to be involved in protests, who've at most committed some minor offenses, being locked up in prison for long periods, often under solitary confinement. That's simply not right, and we should stand up for their rights, like other prisoners who are wrongly imprisoned.
Yeah. Well, that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. I am Craig Pasta Jardula. This is my co-host for LOL, Left on Left, Jeremy Kuzmarov, where the left critiques itself and laughs out loud to keep itself from crying. We'll see you soon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for watching. Go to Pasta to Go if you want to see more. We'll see you soon.